Hey everybody, this is Logan at Central Kentucky Motorsports, and I want to go over some very frequent conversations we have here, and that's all centered around bike selection. I'm going to do it in groups, and the first group that I want to address is going to be the small ones, the youth bikes. Every youth bike that Husqvarna produces is going to be a motocross bike by nature. They're all in the motocross classification, which is going to use the letters and also some of the styling performance characteristics that you would expect from a motocross bike. The smallest bike that they make is the EE2. That is an electric bike. It's in the electric class, so they're all automatic. It's just the motor drive gear to be the control, if you will. There's no shifting of gears, no hand clutch. All of your control is in the throttle of that bike. The EE2 competes in the PW class with the PW50s. And it introduces a competitor for that bike, for that class. So those are starting to take off like wildfire in your youth series. From the EE2, you go up to an EE3. That bike is equivalent to the size of a 50 Mini. Also an electric bike, same principles as the EE2, a bit larger, introducing a little bit more speed and going to kind of class up for your moto riders. Up from the EE3 is an EE5. That one is a senior. It's equivalent to the TC50 within the Husqvarna class or any of the 50 seniors for any of your competitors. From the EE5, we go up into the gas bikes. The TC50 that we just referenced matches right up to that senior EE5, and that's the only one that Husqvarna makes in the United States. It is a senior, no Mini in the States. That bike is also automatic. So it's going to introduce gasoline and some of the characteristics of gasoline power, including a power valve. So a little bit different as far as rideability goes. You may see, some of the straight stretches, some of the low speed sections. Those bikes perform a little bit differently than the electric bikes, but overall, very, very similar speed components, and they line right up in the same motocross classes. Up from that TC50 goes to the TC65. That's your first bike with gears. That one has a 6-speed transmission, a lot of gears in that little guy. It is a little bore motor, so you need a lot of gears. But that one's going to teach the usage of the operation of a clutch. So that's kind of the natural progression of things. You may go with something in EE2, go up to either a Mini or an EE5, something in that range, EE3 from there. Then you go up into your seniors, and then you'll go to the TC65. From there, the last one in the youth motocross category, the youth bikes entirely, is the TC85. That bike comes in 2 different wheel options, and that's going to be the exclusive difference between the 2 bikes. We get questions a lot about swing arms, suspension components, chassis, all of the rest of the bike, with the exception of maybe the number of teeth in the chain, or the number of links in the chain, I should say, is going to be the same between the small wheel, which is the 1714, and the big wheel, which is the 1916. Both of those bikes also 6-speed manual transmission bikes, and those bikes rip. That's going to be kind of the last bit of your youth racing right before you get to the big bikes. And from there, we will transition into the adult motocross bikes. Your adult motocross bikes are going to present 2-stroke and 4-stroke options. We'll talk about 2-stroke first, since that encapsulates all of the gassed youth bikes, kind of a good segue into the adult bikes. Your 2-stroke small bores in your full frame class is going to be a TC125, and all new for 2025 is the TC150. They are small bores, so transmission is going to be kind of designated by the power that those bikes are capable of. The TC150 and TC125 are 6 speeds. It does better for your small bores and does better for racing. The TC150, for all purposes that we're going to discuss in the scope of this video, is the same thing as a TC125 with the 150 motor in it. It's got a little bit more pep. So your TC125, that's going to compete against your 4-stroke 250s. You'll see that in a lot of your moto categories. The TC150 may be a little bit more taboo. That bike is definitely good for your open class. Some race categories are going to have a 150, or some race series are going to have a 150, but kind of be careful. If you're getting a 150 and you're thinking about running that in the lights, just know, especially at some of your AMA stuff, you're not going to be able to do it. So I would recommend discussing with us what kind of race organizations you're going to be a part of before you make a purchase of that one. But that kind of gets all the small bore for you. A lot of people know they're your small bore motocross bikes. Up from there, we go into a TC250. Another quintessential race bike is your two-stroke 250. Wild animal. That one's a 5-speed in the bigger bore two-stroke. Part of that, again, goes back to these power characteristics as for how much spacing you can do between your gears and how many gears may be necessary. Trust that a 5-speed TC250 has got plenty of juice. It's got plenty of long legs. And then similar to the 125 and 150 pairing, that TC300 is going to be built off of that TC250 platform. It's another 5-speed, big, gobs of power motocross bike. And those are starting to make a resurgence back in your Moto series. If you go to some of your local racetracks, I was at one last weekend. We had a local boy here that was winning races on a two-stroke 250. That makes us proud. From your two-stroke motocross bikes, you go into your four-stroke bikes. Again, those will have direct analog with your two strokes. They race together, and essentially a factor of 2 between your motor size as you go up to your four-stroke. So that TC125, if you're picking a four-stroke, you're going to pick the FC250. And that's the smallest bore four-stroke bike that they make in a full-size bike, Husqvarna that is. From the 250, you go up to a 350. We have this conversation a lot. My general take on the conversation is if you're a 250 guy that loves a 250, you've been very happy, but you're just kind of lacking some power, that 350 is the bike for you. If you're a 450 guy and you love anything about a 450 and you go down to a 350, heads up, that may be where the conversation kind of takes a dark turn, and some of those guys aren't quite as happy because you may be missing just a little bit of that grunt that you want out of your 450. And then moving up to the FC 450, it's a beast. Just a heads up, if you've not raced a 450 or if you've not ridden a 450, this one for most part is not for beginners. You may be able to do great in the field on it, but if you take this bike to a tight track or a technical track and you are not a big gobs of power kind of guy, it will take advantage of you. I'm a 250 plus pound guy on average, and a 450 will do what it wants with me if I'm not in control of that bike. So take that for what it's worth. This is going to be the pinnacle of motocross racing, that FC 450, all the power that you can get out of a bike. Across the entirety of the two-stroke and four-stroke adult size lineup, you're going to have the air suspension. So you've got one fork that's an air fork, one fork that's a little bit more of what we're used to with your traditional oil-sprung forks. So you do need to be prepared to adjust the air each time you go out to go riding. Your motocross bikes are pretty well known. A lot of those people are going to know which one you want, but I always circle back to which class you want to race if you're going to be racing it, and make sure that you're going to be set up to be able to race and you're going to pass track spec and have no issues with the classification of your motorcycle. So from the motocross bikes, we're going to go into cross country. That's going to be the next closest comparison, and aesthetically they look the same. In front of me here today is an enduro bike, so it's none of what we've discussed so far. A cross country bike is going to have a number plate on the front. It's going to have no light in the back. It's going to look like a motocross bike. So what makes these bikes different? Let's start off with the two strokes. For 2025, you just have the TX300. So TC300 is your motocross bike. Why is that bike different when we go to cross country? I'm thinking long legs. If I'm thinking of runners, it's going to be very similar for cross country applications. I think of, you know, running in the dunes or maybe running in the canyons or some of your really long races, more like a GNCC, where you're covering some distance, what some of your hair scramble guys are probably going to call Jeep Trail. That's an excellent cross-country application because it has that closed ratio transmission, a little bit more similar to a motocross bike. You have usable first and second gears when you're wanting to cover some ground. It's a little bit longer first and second than you would find in a TE300 Enduro, which we'll come back to. So it's a little bit more competition grade, if you will. Hair scramble guys can love it if they're not so much a come to a stop and work the bike at a standstill while you're standing up. You're going to want to keep that bike moving in first and second gear. So for that reason, that's a highly competitive bike. TX300, built for racing. And that one, if you're going to think of a bike where you may want to go into the woods, may go onto a track, excellent application for you. If that's the customer that comes in and says, hey man, I want to do both. Really, if you talk to your grassroots guys, it's tough to do both perfectly, but that bike does both very well. That bike in 2025, TX300, is going to come with closed cartridge forks, which is a huge upgrade in my opinion. I love those bikes for woods applications more so than the air stuff. So your 24 and prior that may have had air forks throughout the KTM brand lineup, including Husqvarna, that is now closed cartridge, exact series, very much purpose for the woods, can also be tuned to do pretty well on a track. The four-stroke bike in the cross country is now just the FX350. In prior years, they've had the FX450 and the FX350. FX450 was very popular, so a little bit surprised to not see that one in 2025, but it's something that we're becoming aware of. In that event, let's figure out how to make an FC450 the bike for you in the woods. But the FX350 is our woods bike now. A lot of power. That's going to be an open class bike in a lot of your series. That bike is also a 6-speed in 2025. So 6-speed in your TX300, 6-speed in your FX350, a little bit better for those woods applications than their 5-speed counterparts for your motocross applications. After the cross-country lineup, I want to talk about the Enduro lineup. And the Enduro lineup is probably the most popular set of bikes that we will sell here in Lexington, Kentucky because of the terrain around us. Enduro, a branch off of cross-country, is more so woods-oriented than cross-country even. Both of those bikes, your cross-country and your Enduros, they have the 18-inch rear tires. Notice this TE300 in front of me. This is an Enduro bike. 18-inch rear, oversized gas tank, and then that woods-worthy, wood setup suspension that's going to be a little bit more for that Enduro application than a motocross bike or a cross-country bike. These bikes come in 2-stroke and 4-stroke variants. 2-stroke is a little bit more of what we've seen in prior years. It's got a small bore, a TE150, then you go up to a TE250, and finally a TE300. This is the TE300 Pro, a special edition of the TE300. All of those bikes are 6 speeds. When I think of what application to use this bike, it covers the most wide spectrum. So again, that's another reason why we sell the most of them in numbers compared to some of their cross-country and moto counterparts in this area. I think of a bike that does very well on rocks, it does well on roots, it does well on hill climbs, it does well on all of the woods applications because of the variety of performance components of the bike. Your first and second gear, very low gears, so all your slow speed stuff, taking off from a dead stop, taking off on a hill, taking off in general, and or coming to a stop without getting off of the bike, it's the most usable. You're not going to be doing a ton of clutch work down in the first and second. You're going to be able to get over some of that harder terrain without having to work all the finesse of a motorcycle like you would have to in a motocross bike or a cross-country bike in that application. So a lot of your hare scramble guys, even a lot of your GNCC style guys, any of your cross-country guys, some of your backpackers, any of your family riders, trail riders, this bike is a competition bike that can, in my opinion, do it all in the woods. It's not going to do very well on the motocross track. It's a headlight bike, taillight bike. We're adding a few pounds here and there. It doesn't add a whole lot to the overall weight of the bike, but you'll notice on a motocross track that it's not built for that application. Your suspension is too soft. You can tune it up. Then once you get into the woods, it's not going to be great in the woods. It's going to be bucking around, maybe some over or understeering, depending on how you go with your suspension for that application, but it's very well purposed for the woods. That will pretty well cover the woods application. The TE, which is my personal weapon of choice if I'm picking a bike to go to the trails or to go to the races. And from there, we go into some of your dual sports, which is going to be very similar in nomenclature to the Enduro bikes. We're looking at FEs. Every one of the dual sports is a 4-stroke bike. They've made some different sizes in the past. This year they're doing a 350 and a 501 in the smaller bore, if you will. And then as you go up, you go the 701 and then the 901 Norden series. Those bikes are going to be purposed for street registration right out of the manufacturer. So if you're looking for something where you can connect trails, you can ride it to work, you can run it up to the grocery store, let's look at an FE350S for your more woods applications. Always break that down into a proportion of riding when we look at our dual sports. So if you're doing majority woods, say 80% woods, FE350 is a pretty good place to start. If you're a bigger guy like myself, or you want to start doing a little bit more speed, or you're going to go to, 60-40, 50-50, something like that between woods and road riding, that's when you're going to introduce that 501 into the conversation. And then as it goes more towards, 80-20, I'm 80% road, 20% trails, I'm going to look at a 701, and if it's that and or more road and just a little bitty bit of woods, that's when I'm going to a Norden 901. The Norden 901, in my opinion, is going to be the best for highway speeds. So if I want to do an interstate run in Lexington, Kentucky here down to say Renfro Valley, and then maybe get a little bit dirty down in Renfro Valley and some of those trails and ride it back, that's a 901 for me. If I'm maybe running down to Berea, which is only half of the interstate run to Berea, that would be down to Renfro Valley, I'm probably riding a 701. Especially if I'm going to do more dirt application once I get to Berea, go to somewhere like Turkey Foot or Estrie, if you're familiar with the topography. That's a good 701 bike as opposed to a 901 because it is lighter, a little more compact, a little bit more manageable. Now, if I'm going to trailer down, I want to ride around in the Berea area, and I'm only looking at 55-mile-an-hour speed zones, and I'm majority going to be riding off-road, that's when that 501 is an excellent application for me as a 250-pound man. And then if I were a smaller man, or if I'm going to do all exclusively woods and I want to be competitive about it, I'm going to look at that 350. One more newly introduced bike within the last couple model years that has continued into the four-stroke FE series, that Enduro series, is the FE450. It is not a dual sport bike, that is a woods bike, but very similar to this TE300. If I want the most power that I can get in an Enduro application, that FE450 is a closed course bike. It is not road registered, it's for off-highway use only, but it is purposed for the woods. So, contrast it with an FC450 that is probably too much power, probably too much spacing between the gears for most folks to have a good trail ride. That FE450 is coming back to that 6-speed transmission, which is good for those woods applications, so that you get some smaller gear spacing and you can find that gear that works a little bit more particularly for the application you find yourself in. The last couple of bikes in the Husqvarna lineup are going to be the FS450 and the 701 Supermoto. 701 Supermoto, very much like its 701 Enduro counterpart, is a road registered bike straight from the factory. So that is in the street series of motorcycles from Husqvarna, is ready to go immediately on the street, and that one's a sumo bike. Tons of fun. You think your street tires on a dirt bike, people love the look of them, the sound of them, the operation of them. It's got quick shifters on it, up and down. So that bike is a ton of fun to ride on the road. The FS450, not like the 701 Supermoto, is not road legal. So if you're buying an FS450, it is a competition bike. That bike is not to be plated from the manufacturer. It is for racing Supermoto tracks. So that one, maybe the most fun, the most competitive Supermoto that's on the market that you can buy straight from the factory, is ready to go for racing applications. It is a number plate bike, no extra bells and whistles, only power, with some street gear to help you with braking and traction as well. It's got your Sumo setup, the 16.5 wheels on it, with the oversized brake components so that you can go road racing. So that is, from a very high level scope, a little bit of our decision making process when having that conversation with the customer and selecting a bike. I want to know what proportion of riding you're doing. If I'm looking at a cross country bike and an enduro bike, comparing against those two, I want to know if you're doing a lot more fast paced stuff or if you're doing a lot more slow paced stuff. If I'm looking at a motocross bike or a cross country bike, I want to know how much you're going to be on the motocross track or how much you're going to be off the motocross track in, say, a woods application, Jeep trail application, or an open fields application. That way we can tell, if you're a higher percentage motocross, you're a higher percentage, high speed woods, we'll go that direction. If it's woods, and then we start deciding that it's lower speed stuff, we may start at a motocross bike, just establish that a cross country or enduro would be better. And then if it's a lot of low speed stuff, that comes to the surface in our discovery process, then we land on an enduro bike. And then for the dual sport stuff, a very frequent conversation, which motor size do I need? We go back to that one. Which proportion of trail riding versus on highway riding you're gonna be doing with that bike. And then from that, once we get landed on a bike, the next place to go from there is how do we want to upfit this bike to make sure that it's the best case for you. Throughout every single motorcycle in every lineup of every manufacturer that I would ever discuss, I want the suspension set up for you. So for me, that means being a bigger guy, I have to respring every bike that I go with, and I will usually send it off and have it revalved too in that process. And then protective components, I can't state this enough, the best time to protect your bike is before it's broken. So that's something we want to talk to everybody about, is to get your skid plates, your brake guards, even maybe your TPS guard on there. Make sure that all the sensitive components of that bike are going to be protected for your application. And then we look at the performance aspect of it too. Is it going to be best to go with maybe a high compression cylinder for what you're doing? Most everybody can benefit from adding a fan kit to the bike. Most everybody can benefit from a pipe, be it even just the exhaust note or maybe the power that gets added. But a lot of people will go with pipes too. And we here at Central Kentucky Motorsports have an excellent team of specialists to help you with both bike selection and bike upfitting, so that it's going to be the best tool for whatever job it is you're doing. So please do reach out to us, Central Kentucky Motorsports, at 859-888-0740 for all of your bike selections, all your bike questions, pass them by us. We love bikes, we love mechanical theory, and then as well for how to upfit your bike and then to get you the deals on the stuff that you need for your bike. Thank you for watching and have a great day.